The Zephrun Raiders were not a name you wanted to hear whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. They had a reputation that stretched across systems, from one end of the Milky Way to the other. Merciless, ruthless, efficient. When they came for a job, whole civilizations trembled. And Earth? It was next on their list. The call had come through the right channels, passed along by an anonymous source, a galactic underworld contact who thought the Zephrun's brutal ways would make them the perfect contractors for a job. Their task was simple: eliminate humanity's last line of defense, a small but stubborn government agency tasked with safeguarding Earth's interests in the cosmic arena. The humans were still too ignorant, too unprepared for the alien threats. Lurking just beyond the stars, the Zephrons would wipe them out and move on to their next assignment. But what they didn't know was that humanity had already prepared. In a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of a forgotten military base in Nevada, a ragtag group of mercenaries gathered, mostly Earthborn, and few of them younger than 40. Each member of the team had a history, a past that didn't quite fit the clean-cut images you saw in the recruitment videos. They had seen the worst of humanity and fought in the ugliest corners of the galaxy, but they were no strangers to what it meant to fight for Earth. John Boomer Hawkins, the team leader, was a relic of a past long gone. His short-cropped hair was starting to show hints of gray, and his eyes still carried the sharp edge of someone who had seen too much. But it was his mind, quick-witted and strategic, that made him invaluable. His crew trusted him implicitly, mainly because he'd been right every time before. He was the kind of guy who'd survived in the toughest conditions and still cracked a joke when the pressure mounted. "You sure about this, Boomer?" asked Carlos "Rocket" Diaz, a tech guru with a smile that could light up a room but a mind sharp, enough to hack into any system in seconds. He adjusted the controls on his console with the precision of a surgeon, his eyes scanning multiple feeds from satellites across Earth's orbit. "This is no backyard brawl. These guys are professionals." Boomer chuckled, leaning back in his chair and flipping through a well-worn list of weapons options. "Carlos, when you're out of options, you improvise. We may not have the firepower they do, but we've got something they'll never understand. Human ingenuity. They're gonna learn the hard way that humans don't just bend over when things get tough." The rest of the crew, a colorful mix of old soldiers and new recruits, stood in the shadows, each with their own doubts, but bound by one singular truth. This wasn't just another mission. This was Earth's last stand. Jesse "Viper" Langston, the team's sniper and expert sharpshooter, always quiet and calculating, nodded in agreement. "Humans don't quit, no matter how much these guys want us to." Her fingers twitched toward the scope resting against her shoulder, ready to embrace the silence of her next shot. Jesse had learned long ago that the best way to deal with a bully was to make them feel the weight of their mistakes, at a distance. "All I'm saying is, maybe we shouldn't piss them off too early," said Marcus "Shrapnel" Harris, the demolitionist of the group. His voice was gruff, his frame built for heavy lifting and planting explosives in the most inconvenient places. His eyes flickered to the large crates of explosives stacked up against the wall. "They're bigger than us. They're stronger than us. We need a plan, Boomer. And I'm not talking about just improvising." Boomer smiled again, but this time it wasn't the grin of a man who thought everything would go smoothly. It was the grin of someone who had spent years preparing for the worst. "Don't worry, Marcus. We're going to send them a message, and they'll get it loud and clear. Earth may be young compared to the rest of the galaxy, but we've got something they'll never see coming, something they'll never expect." The Zephrun Raiders were, in fact, expecting little from Earth. They had watched humanity for centuries, catalogued its weaknesses, and dismissed it as a species too fragile to make a real impact on the galactic stage. Earth's military strength was laughable compared to the advanced empires that ruled the galaxy. It was nothing more than a ball of water and dust, populated by a race of curious creatures with no true means of defending themselves. They were an easy target. As the Zifron ships entered Earth's orbit, their sensors pinged with readings of a primitive, yet active planet. They had the element of surprise on their side, a fleet of mercenaries capable of taking on entire worlds without breaking a sweat. The squadron's leader, General Zarak the Unyielding, grinned beneath his cybernetic helmet. Humans, he thought, would make for easy prey. Back in the Nevada warehouse, the mercenaries prepared their final check. They had scouted the area, planned their routes, and ensured that Earth's limited resources were used to their fullest advantage. But what they were relying on wasn't advanced technology or superior weaponry. It was something simpler, a trait the Xiphron raiders had miscalculated. Jessie adjusted her sniper scope with a careful, practiced hand. "Boomer, I can take out a few of their sentries from here. Should I do it?" Boomer shook his head. "Not yet. They need to see us first. Let them think they have the advantage. Let them make their move. That's when we strike." Carlos tapped a few commands on his screen and smirked. "I'll just make sure we've got a few surprises lined up in case they decide to get too fancy with their technology. I've been tinkering with their comms. They won't even see us coming." The Xiphron forces were already landing in the nearby mountains, their boots hitting the ground with a sense of finality. But Boomer's team wasn't worried. They didn't need the most advanced weapons or tech. They didn't need overwhelming numbers. What they had was a desire to survive, an understanding of the terrain, and a healthy dose of humor. Earth would never go down quietly. As the Xiphron troops made their first move toward a small, unsuspecting town, they encountered the first sign of humanity's response. A simple message, transmitted through the Universal Communication Network, embedded into their comms feed. It was short, concise, and laced with the unmistakable voice of Boomer himself. "Welcome to Earth. You get one warning. Leave now, or we'll show you why humans are more than just a punching bag." The Xiphron mercenaries paused, confusion rippling through their ranks. Was this a trap? A joke? Zarak snarled. "Who dares to mock us?" he roared, scanning the transmission source. There was no answer, only static. Boomer's smile stretched wide, knowing it was just the beginning. The Xiphron raiders were not amused. General Zarak, standing tall within his battle armor, felt a surge of anger pulse through his veins. He had commanded mercenaries across galaxies, quashed uprisings, and put entire planets to the torch. But this was something different. The nerve of these humans, a planet of insignificant life forms, to mock him, to send a message rather than cower before his superior force. His men shifted uneasily. The transmission had been short, but the implications were clear. The Xiphrons, notorious for their fearsome reputation, had been insulted by an enemy they had never taken seriously. Zarak clenched his fists, his mind spinning through possibilities. He was no fool. He knew that beneath the bravado, this could be more than a simple show of defiance. Perhaps the humans weren't as weak as they seemed. "We will not be mocked." Zarak growled, his voice booming across the comms, reaching his mercenary squad. "Prepare yourselves. We will show these creatures the consequences of their arrogance." Back in Nevada, Boomer knew the Xiphron reaction was inevitable. He'd expected it. But what mattered now wasn't what they thought of humanity. It was how they would respond. He stood in front of the rest of the crew, his face set in that familiar, steely expression that meant business. They all knew what came next. No more jokes, no more time to prepare. The Xiphron raiders were coming, and it was time to show them why humans had never been easy prey. Jessie stood next to him, adjusting her sniper rifle with mechanical precision. She'd spent years tracking down targets in hostile environments, her calm demeanor always hiding the intensity of her focus. "They'll be expecting us to scatter, to run," she said, her voice cool but steady. "Let's disappoint them." Carlos flashed a quick grin. "If we're disappointing them, it's only because they thought they had the upper hand." He punched a few keys on his portable console, his eyes flickering with the kind of excitement that only came from tinkering with alien tech. "Give me a few seconds, and I'll make sure their communications are a mess. We don't want them calling for backup." Boomer nodded, his gaze sharp as he addressed the team. "It's simple, folks. We'll fight smart. We've got the terrain, we've got the element of surprise. But most of all, we've got the one thing they never counted on." He paused, his eyes locking with each member of the crew. "We're humans, and when it gets tough, we get tougher." Marcus snorted, rolling his eyes as he hefted a heavy backpack full of explosives. "You sound like a motivational speaker, Boomer. Let's just make sure we don't get blown to bits first." Boomer chuckled, always ready with a retort. "Don't worry, Marcus. I'm pretty sure the explosives will be the ones doing the blowing up, not us." He gave his old friend a playful shove. "We've been through worse, remember?" Marcus gave a small, dry smile. "Yeah, well, I'm getting too old for this, but I'll do my part. Just make sure the plan doesn't get us killed." With a final glance at his team, Boomer turned toward the rugged terrain outside. The Zifron mercenaries were coming. This wasn't about just defeating them. It was about showing the galaxy that Earth had teeth, and they were ready to bite. He could already hear the faint rumblings of the Zifron's landing craft, their engines screaming through the atmosphere, ready to turn everything to ash. "I'm ready," Jessie said flatly, already in position, her sniper rifle propped up against a rocky outcrop. "Stay sharp," Boomer ordered. "We've got one shot at this." The minutes that passed felt like hours, the tension thickening the air. Boomer couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt, the kind that always crept in just before battle. But he quickly pushed it aside. Doubt had no place here. The Zifron raiders made their first move. Their armored forms cut through the barren landscape like a nightmare. Each of them carried a weapon that could level cities with a single blast. But Boomer wasn't worried about their firepower. He knew how to exploit their weaknesses. They had one, and he'd been studying it for weeks. Carlos had managed to hack into their comms. The moment the Zifron mercenaries got too close to their intended target, the human crew would strike. Not with brute force, but with precision. Earth's finest could hit harder than a plasma cannon, and they didn't need the fancy alien tech to do it. As the Zifron forces advanced, Zarok's men were on edge. They had expected a much easier target, an unprepared, primitive species that would fall at their feet. But as the seconds ticked by, their confidence began to erode. The landscape around them was too quiet, the human settlements too still. This wasn't what they had anticipated. This wasn't an ordinary defense force. Something was off. Zarok scowled beneath his helmet. His patience was wearing thin. "Find them. Now!" The first shot rang out just as his command hit the air. It wasn't loud, not by their standards, but it was precise. The bullet tore through the air, striking a Zifron scout square in the chest. The creature's eyes widened in shock as it crumpled to the ground. Jessie's voice cut through the comms with a crisp, confident tone. "One down." The Zifron raiders scrambled. They hadn't expected this level of resistance, let alone precision. The rest of the crew moved with military efficiency, their weapons causing havoc among the enemy ranks. Boomer had been right. Humanity's greatest asset was adaptability, and when the chips were down, Earth's fighters were more than ready to evolve. Boomer's laughter crackled over the comms as he watched a few Zifron soldiers scatter from their position. "You guys got this? Or do you need me to come and save your asses?" Carlos, behind a makeshift console built from scavenged Zifron parts, snorted. "You just keep 'em distracted, old man. We've got this covered." Boomer flashed a grin, but his focus never wavered. The Zifron forces were panicking, their communications scrambling as Carlos messed with their systems. He could see the fear begin to spread, that familiar flicker of realization dawning on their faces. They weren't invincible. They weren't the apex predators they thought they were. The fight raged on, but Boomer could already feel the tide turning in their favor. The Zifron raiders had underestimated humanity, just as many others had before them. And now, they would learn the hard way that Earth wasn't a place you could trample without consequences. Zarok's voice echoed in the chaos, still filled with disbelief. "No, this can't be happening." Boomer's answer came over the comms with a smirk. "Oh, it's happening, Zarok. It's happening." The chaos outside only grew louder as the Zifron mercenaries struggled to regroup. Their initial shock had given way to fury, and their well-coordinated forces were now fraying at the edges. Zarok's once imposing warriors were nothing more than scattered, desperate survivors trying to salvage what remained of their pride. Boomer, perched in the shadows of a dilapidated warehouse, surveyed the battlefield through his binoculars. His team had done the impossible. They'd turned the tables on the invaders. And yet, there was a gnawing feeling in his gut, a feeling that this was only the beginning. He couldn't shake the thought that the Zifron might have one final trick up their sleeve, a trump card they hadn't yet played. Jesse's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through his thoughts. "They're retreating, Boomer. We've got 'em on the ropes." Boomer's eyes never left the scope. He could see the mercenaries pulling back, retreating into the cover of their advanced tech. But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. The Zifron hadn't fought with their full strength yet. He could feel it, the calm before a storm. They were regrouping, not surrendering. "Hold tight," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They're not done yet." Carlos's voice interrupted the silence, his usual playful tone replaced by a rare seriousness. "Boomer, I'm seeing something weird on the radar. It's like they're setting up a perimeter around us. They're not pulling back. They're preparing for something." "Damn it!" Boomer hissed, his fingers tightening around his binoculars. "They're getting smart. This isn't over yet." Marcus let out a loud exhale. "Great, so now we're dealing with a bunch of wounded, pissed-off aliens and whatever new tech they're hiding in their sleeves." Perfect. Boomer's mind raced. He knew what this meant. The Zifron weren't just some ordinary mercenary force. They were calculating, dangerous, and had more resources than they'd shown. If they were digging in, it meant they weren't leaving until they'd destroyed every last one of them. Jesse let out a quiet sigh. "How do you want to handle it, Boomer? We've already shown them we're not some easy target. Do we go all in, or do we wait for them to come to us?" Boomer ran a hand over his jaw, considering their options. Going all in meant committing everything they had, and it was risky. Too risky. But if they waited, it would give the Zifron more time to regroup, to bring in reinforcements. They'd be ready for anything, and they'd have the numbers to crush humanity's resistance. The decision weighed on him, but in the end, there was only one choice. "We make them come to us," he said firmly. "We've got the advantage. We know the terrain, and we've got a few surprises left in our pocket." Carlos snorted in amusement. "You sure it's not just the old man's gut feeling talking?" Boomer cracked a smile despite the tension. "Yeah, but my gut's been right more times than I care to admit." The plan was simple, but it relied on getting the mercenaries to underestimate them even more. They'd bait the Zifron forces into thinking they had the upper hand, then hit them when they least expected it. There were still a few weapons hidden around the area, all set up to go off at the right moment. Boomer trusted his crew. He'd been through enough with them to know they were more than capable. Jessie, as usual, took the lead. She moved like a shadow, slipping silently from one vantage point to another, her eyes always scanning, always alert. She was a master of this kind of work, familiar with the terrain, and able to blend into it like she belonged there. It was a skill that came in handy more often than not. Carlos, on the other hand, was busy working his magic behind the scenes. "I've got the Zifron's comms locked down," he announced, his fingers flying over his console. "They won't be calling for backup anytime soon. And their tech's going haywire. I've hacked into their defensive grid, so they're flying blind." Boomer gave a nod of approval. Good work, Carlos. Keep it up. The tension in the air was palpable. The Zifron forces, now fully aware that they were dealing with a far more dangerous enemy than they had anticipated, were starting to move with caution. The whole operation had shifted from a full-scale assault to a standoff, with both sides posturing for control. Zarok paced restlessly in his command center, his mind working overtime. He had underestimated humanity, but now that mistake would be corrected. The humans were resourceful, that much was clear, but no amount of resourcefulness could stand against the might of the Zyphron mercenaries. The next phase of the operation would crush them once and for all. "Get the heavy artillery ready," Zarok barked. "We'll see how they handle real power." Boomer's heart sank when he heard the rumble of Zyphron engines in the distance. Heavy artillery. That meant they were bringing out the big guns, the kind of firepower that could obliterate everything in its path. "Change of plans," Boomer muttered. "They're not retreating. They're getting ready for the final push. Prepare yourselves." Marcus's voice came through with a sharp edge. "Are we going to stand our ground then? We've got the high ground, but we're not invincible." Boomer's eyes narrowed. "We're not backing down. Not now. We've already shown them we're not easy prey. And we won't start running now," Jessie chimed in, a steady calm in her voice. "I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve. Let's make this interesting." The crew readied themselves for the inevitable. The Zyphron weren't backing down, and neither were they. The standoff was about to reach its breaking point, and the first real exchange of power would determine the next move. If they didn't stop the Zyphron now, humanity's survival in this sector would be a fleeting dream. Boomer took one last glance at the horizon. They had a slim window, but it was enough. "All right, people. Show time. Let's remind them who they're messing with." With a final, resolute breath, Boomer turned back to face the rest of the crew. The Zyphron had one final chance to learn their lesson, and humanity was more than ready to teach them. The air was thick with anticipation as Boomer and his crew waited in the shadows, barely breathing, their senses heightened. The Zyphron forces were closing in, their heavy artillery rumbling across the terrain. Every second stretched into an eternity. Boomer's pulse was steady, but his mind was a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. The Zyphron weren't just any mercenaries, they were professionals, dangerous, relentless, and resourceful. But humanity had one thing they didn't: the will to survive. And Boomer knew that as long as they had that, they had a chance. "Ready." "When you are, Boomer," Jessie's voice came over the comms, calm and collected as always. Despite the overwhelming odds, her confidence never wavered. It was one of the reasons she was always at the front lines. "Let's give them a show," Boomer replied, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "They've underestimated us this far. Let's make sure they never forget what happens when you mess with humans." The Zyphron had assumed that once their heavy artillery was in play, the humans would fold, retreat, or panic. Instead, they were about to get the surprise of their lives. Carlos had done his part, hacking into the Zyphron's communication network, causing their systems to glitch at the most inconvenient moments. He was a master at misdirection, a trickster at heart who loved making the enemy doubt their own senses. As the Zyphron forces began to adjust their strategy, Carlos launched his final surprise, an electromagnetic pulse that would cripple their sensors for a critical few moments. 3, 2, 1, now, Carlos called out, and with that, the battlefield became a cacophony of chaos. Boomer's team sprang into action. Jessie moved with lethal precision, her sniper rifle set to take out key targets from impossible angles. Her calm demeanor was matched only by her ruthlessness in combat. She had always been the one to find a way, to adapt when others faltered. And today, she was no different. Marcus, with his brawler's build and quick wit, made his way to the front, a massive anti-tank, rifle in hand. He wasn't the type to hide behind cover, preferring to go toe-to-toe with the biggest threats. and in this case, the Xiphron artillery was the biggest threat. His grin was wide, a mixture of excitement and mockery, as he lined up his shot. "They want to bring the pain?" Marcus muttered, lining up his sights. "Let's show them what pain really looks like." Boomer led the charge, moving quickly and with purpose. He had the confidence of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he was the best at making the impossible seem like a Tuesday afternoon. His knack for reading people, for understanding the flow of battle, had kept him alive and successful for years. Today was no different. The Xiphron artillery fired first, but they had miscalculated. The electromagnetic pulse had already taken a toll, and their sensors were failing them at the critical moment. Boomer and his team moved in, knowing their window was narrow but vital. The Xiphron couldn't track their movements with precision, and that gave them the edge they needed. Jesse's rifle rang out, its thunderous boom echoing across the battlefield. One shot, one kill, exactly as planned. The Xiphron's commander, a towering figure cloaked in armor, dropped to the ground, his body collapsing in a heap. The message was clear: humanity was not to be trifled with. Marcus roared, unloading a barrage of rounds into the advancing Xiphron vehicles. His shots were reckless but effective, the sheer force of his firepower creating chaos in the enemy ranks. Boomer's heart raced as he watched the carnage unfold. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now, not ever. As the Xiphron forces reeled from the unexpected assault, Boomer's team continued their relentless push. Each move was a calculated risk, each victory a small but significant step toward turning the tide. But even as they gained ground, Boomer knew this wouldn't be over until the last Xiphron soldier was neutralized. And that wasn't going to be easy. The Xiphron commander, despite his injury, was far from finished. He snarled at his remaining forces, rallying them with a guttural cry. "We are mercenaries. We are Xiphron. You will not be beaten by these inferior creatures." Boomer's eyes narrowed. That was the moment he had been waiting for. The Xiphron had made their final move, underestimating humanity's resolve. It was time to end this. "Move in," Boomer ordered, his voice like steel. Jesse, Marcus, and Carlos fell into place, moving as a unit toward the commander's last stand. The Xiphron forces regrouped, but it was too late. Boomer's team was already there, each member anticipating the enemy's next move. Jessie took the high ground, her sniper rifle making her an unstoppable force, while Marcus's brute strength allowed him to clear the path. Carlos hacked into the remaining Xiphron communications, scrambling their tactical signals and sowing even more confusion among the ranks. The Xiphron commander glared at Boomer, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think you've won? You think you've bested the Xiphron? We will destroy your planet. We will—" Boomer's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You already lost. This isn't your fight anymore." With a swift movement, Boomer threw the final piece of the puzzle into place. A well-placed explosive charge detonated beneath the Xiphron's final stronghold, sending the remaining forces into disarray. The commander's eyes widened in realization. He had underestimated them for the last time. The shockwave from the explosion sent the Xiphron forces scattering in all directions. The once proud mercenaries were now nothing more than a disorganized rabble, their weapons useless, their morale shattered. It was over. They had been defeated not by superior technology, but by the sheer will of a human team that refused to give up. Boomer stood over the remnants of the Xiphron stronghold, his breathing steady but his mind still racing. He didn't celebrate, didn't revel in the victory. Not yet. There were always more battles to be fought, more enemies to face. But for the first time since this all began, Boomer allowed himself a small, quiet smile. They had won, and that victory, hard-earned and costly, would be a story for the ages. "We'll be ready for the next round," he said, his voice filled with the quiet confidence that had carried him and his team through countless challenges. We're just getting started.